Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deep Dive, Emerald City Hockey Seattle Kraken podcast. And RJ, it is finally time for us to start looking at head coaching candidates for the Seattle Kraken, as we're starting to get some news out there as to who the Kraken have maybe talked to. A job offer seems to be out there already for somebody. We'll definitely get into that. It's time. It's time.
Yes, and we did do this again about a year ago at this time as well, so it does feel odd to be kind of back here again doing it, but this is a much anticipated episode, much requested by a lot of you. We
Yeah.
have listened, we have heard you, we know this is what you wanted, but we wanted to kind of wait a week or two just to see if there was anybody confirmed interviewing wise. This is what we did last year as well, and it really helps us kind of get an idea of what the team is looking for and have certain people to add to the list. Because when I made my first list, Dylan, and I kind of narrowed it down later, but my first list was upwards of 20 names, and that really would be too much to talk about. So we've narrowed it down to 8 plus a surprise candidate from each of us that we both like and wanted to make the case for, that each other, we don't know about each other. So you don't know who mine is. I don't know who yours is. So I'm excited to hear that at the end as well.
Yeah, I remember when, coaching carousel season kicked off, ESPN put out a big master article of just all of the candidates for NHL head coaching jobs around the league, and it was over 60 names. And it was like, this is why you need to wait a little, gotta get an idea of which directions the Kraken are looking before we can go ahead and do this episode of the pod. But it does feel like it is time for us to go ahead and get there, and I'm excited to dive in and talk about it, RJ.
Yeah, me too. But before we dive in and start, I think we do need to talk about our friend Rico Tessendor.
That is true. That is true. And while the Kraken are going out there and interviewing these head coaching candidates, talking with them, consulting, perhaps one could even call it, it just seemed like the perfect time to remind everybody that if you are ever in need of a personal injury attorney, Rico Tessendor is there for you. And unlike, say, trying to get a hold of a Rick Tocchet or a Jay Woodcroft, Rico's going to be there. He's going to be available. He's going to be listening if you call at 425-778-9800 or visit his website, ricotessendor.com, where you can get a free consultation with him to discuss your potential case, we'll call it. It's
and
exactly
I think a lot
what
of
the
the
Kraken
things
need right now, RJ.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of the things you'd look for in a good coach, you look for in a good personal injury attorney. I mean, someone certainly with experience. We'll talk about how I think the Kraken want somebody with experience there and a history of positive results for their players or their clients.
Right. Now, do you think the Kraken would call for a free consultation on who to hire as their head coach? Rico Tessendor is a season ticket holder.
That's true. And we know they listen to season ticket holders. We
do.
learned that plenty from Todd Lewicki and season ticket holder changes. So I would hope they gave Rico a call.
Yeah. So
he's not on our list of 8 coaches here, but I would hope they at least gave him a call.
Exactly. And while we hope none of you ever need his services, the odds say at some point someone out there will be involved in an accident, whether on the road, at work, or anywhere in between. And when you are, we hope you give Rico a call again at 425-778-9800 or visit his website, ricotessendor.com, for that free consultation. And also, RJ, before we dive into the coaches, also want to let everybody know that over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey, tonight will be my prospect chat live stream, where we're going to be looking at video of the potential options the Kraken could be picking at the number 8 spot in the upcoming NHL draft. I'm really looking forward to looking at all of that with everybody. We always have such a good time watching the prospects there, and I think that now that we can officially transition over into draft season, it's going to be a good one. And then I'll pass it over to you to talk about our upcoming live game commentary.
Yes, so our live game commentary is in a couple days on Wednesday, the 14th of May. It's going to be for Game 5 of the Leafs-Panthers series, one that's gone back and forth. Leafs win the first 2, Panthers win the next 2, and we're going to be watching Game 5 all together. That's going to be a 4 o'clock start time, so everyone join us at 4 on Patreon. We'll post the YouTube link. That's how it usually works, and it's going to be a fun game. I think, Dylan, your Panthers, you were ready to write them off on
I,
the Red Glare podcast last week. But hey, they're back. They're back in the series. It's going to be a real fun one. Looking forward to watching with everybody too, especially for a non-Kraken game. It just
yeah.
feels like we can kind of relax a little bit more, being less attached to the result.
Relax more. I'm gonna be such a ball of nerves. I'm gonna be such a mess watching my cats in this one, but it should be a good one. And hey, I was not doubting them. I was just reminding them what they need to do to win. It's the difference.
Okay,
Paul Maurice
that's
knows we're still good.
that.
He
Yeah,
told me.
that's your story. Okay,
He told
okay,
me
that
via
sounds
Ron
good.
Francis, who they shared a bench once with, which will be a story for the offseason.
I know, yeah, that we found that out before recording today. That's why the podcast is out later than usual today. We got distracted by that one, but there will also be another live commentary game for one of the conference final games once the schedule for all that is out. So we'll have a second one this month as well, and then finally my armchair GM stream later in the month on the 27th.
Yep. So definitely looking forward to watching all of this good stuff with everybody soon. All right, RJ, before we get into the 8 candidates plus the surprise candidates plus the honorable mentions that I prepared, it's gonna be
Good,
we're
we
gonna
got
end up
tons of
at
names
20.
here.
Before we get in there, I know you kind of wanted to go over what we feel like the Kraken need from the head coaching position moving forward and what we want to see out of the next head coach for the Seattle Kraken.
Yes, and I think that's a natural starting point for any coaching search. Or if you're looking to bring anybody on, right? You look at, okay, what kind of qualities do we want in a coach? And it was something that Jason Botterill and Ron Francis were asked about at the end of year press conference, where they talked about kind of the change in roles and everything. And so I think we'll start with maybe what the team might be looking for. We have a couple indications, but nothing really solid. But I think then we're going to go into what you and I want to see. As far as what the team's looking for, I think maybe if you want to read between the lines a little bit, I think they're probably looking for ideally somebody with some NHL head coaching experience. This maybe isn't like last year's search where we went into a lot of names and a lot of maybe first time coaches. We'll have some of those, but I do think they want somebody who can win right away and get the best out of the team in the short term. And I think that makes sense because, well, if you're not looking for that, if you're looking at maybe a 2 to 3 year timeline, someone who can grow with the team, I think you probably keep Dan around. It doesn't make sense
Mhm.
to make such a quick coaching change. And also, if your plan is not to be in the playoff mix for a couple of years, it doesn't really make sense to be aggressive this offseason, as the team has already said many times that they will do. So I think they're looking for somebody who can try and sniff and be around the playoff hunt right away. And that probably means somebody with some NHL head coaching experience.
Yeah, no, that definitely seems to be the direction that they're going in based on the names that they've been linked to. I think the one other kind of common thread that I think about with all of those coaches that, again, we don't know necessarily how close they've been linked to all of these names, but all the ones that we've heard, like the national media talk about them potentially being interested in, is also coaches that have, good rapport with their players, right? People, guys that are more personable with their players and kind of have that more player first connection. That seems to be another common thread that I've noticed kind of when researching all of the candidates and specifically the ones that the team seems to have talked to already or has been linked to. Feels like that has been the common thread here for me.
Right. The rapport is key. The communication is key, and not just with the players, but I think you going up in the organization as well with the front office, with all the resources that they have. And that is something that Botterill did speak very clearly to. He
Yeah.
said he wants somebody who can work with other areas of the organization. He kind of compared it to a CEO, I think. He talked about how a CEO needs to kind of work with all areas of the organization, all the resources they have available to them. And I think looking backwards as well, I think clearly there was a disconnect between Dan Bilesma and the front office. I mean, that's just kind of clear from everything that's come out since his firing. And he probably wasn't everybody in that front office's top choice. And so I think they want somebody who's going to be on the same page from the top down in the organization with the front office and able to use all the resources available to them.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So now, as for what we want to see, RJ, from a head coaching candidate here for the Seattle Kraken, there's a lot of things I think that we could probably get into. But for you, what's the number one thing that you want to see from the next head coach of the Seattle Kraken?
I mean, I have a list of, I think, 5 things that I want. Like, a candidate doesn't need to have all of them for me to be satisfied, but of course, the more the better. I guess the number one thing I want to see is and I guess the word I'll use for it is structure. I
Hmm.
want a game plan. I want a clear structure of how the team is going to play that they can have success in and stick to over the course of a season. That's probably the number one thing. Number two is accountability. I want somebody who is going to be able to enforce accountability when players don't play up to the standards they need to, and the team as a whole. And I think that's been an issue for the Kraken the last couple seasons. Third, I want someone you can trust to handle the young players. Somebody who's not going to mess up the development of a Shane Wright or like a Yanni Newman coming up, or all the prospects they have coming up. Fourth, ideally, I'd like to see some NHL experience, preferably as a head coach. And then fifth, winning. Somewhere on that resume, I want to see team success, preferably at the NHL level, preferably as a head coach, but not a must for either of those two, but it certainly is a plus for me.
Yeah, so we had the same five things, just in slightly different order, and
Oh, did we really?
more or less the same five things. My number one, I didn't hear you necessarily mention, but I'm sure it fits in with some of the stuff that you talked about. For me, the number one thing that I want to see is a coach who can game plan. Right? I want to see a coach that can make adjustments mid game, and somebody who can, watch tape for the other team, see what it is that they do, see what their tendencies are, see what system they run, and then can go out there and make those adjustments game by game, and then inside of those games, period by period, to try to take advantage of anything that you see, right? This was something that the Kraken did a few times over the course of last season, had good results, but it was just not something that we saw consistently from them. And I know we didn't really see anything consistently from them last season, but this was definitely something that it felt like we didn't see consistently from them last year. And I just feel like being able to have that strong game planning, you know, methodology is the thing that takes teams to that like next step. So like if you're a playoff contender, I feel like doing that over the course of the regular season banks you enough points to become a playoff team. If you're a playoff team, doing that throughout the playoffs gets you into that next level where you become a Stanley Cup contender. And right now, as the Kraken are trying to become a playoff team again, or even just to get out of being a bad team and become a playoff contender, I feel like that's something that they're going to have to do, because if you can just game plan for 5 to 10 games over the course of the year and have those all swing in your favor, you're talking about another 10 or 20 points in the standings. It makes a huge difference. And I just want to see that from the team again. Number two, I have structure. I want to have, as much as I want that game planning and things to kind of change based off of what team you're playing, you need to have a really solid foundation that your players are working from. And I want to see maybe a more solid foundation than what we saw last year from the team. Third, I have the young players. That's obviously going to be very important for the Kraken, not just with Matty Beniers and Shane Wright's continuing development, but with more players coming up from the AHL level now that we have a lot of the prospects that the Kraken have drafted in later rounds starting to join the team. Yanni Newman, who got 12 games last year, he's going to or should be a bigger part of things next year. We'll see what ends up happening with Berkeley Catton, who's doing fantastic right now in the WHL finals, 1-1 series there between Medicine Hat and Spokane. Berkeley Cat, a big part of the Spokane win yesterday, so shout out to him. But I want to see that kind of development there. Fourth is winning for me. I have that above NHL experience for me, because I do think that, particularly as the game evolves, and we've seen it undergo a pretty big evolution in the last decade, I'll take coaches that have maybe won at lower levels of hockey right now, but have done so thinking about ways that hockey is currently being played, over somebody who's maybe has a longer NHL coaching resume but doesn't have a ton of recent success. And then finally, I do have that NHL experience. It's something that would be nice, but for me, it's a little lower on the priority list.
Yeah, I think the last two there, and as we look at the different resumes, it's you're going to have different levels of winning and experience at different, and you kind of have to just meld it together and kind of see
Yeah,
what the overall picture is. But I think we got a pretty similar idea of what we're looking for in a coach. That's a lot of overlap, and we didn't
yeah,
consult on this list at all as far
no.
as what we're looking for. So I think we're pretty much on the same page. And with that, I think we can look at the coaching market and see some of the names that are available. And I do want to talk about the market as a whole just for a second, because I'm sorry, Dylan, I don't want to be too negative here, but it does feel like kind of a tough coaching market this year,
Mhm.
especially if you're looking for somebody with NHL experience. I think the two of us kind of agree that there's always a long list of potentially promising first time head coaches
Yes.
who excite us, right? But I don't know that that's what the Kraken necessarily want in this coaching search. As I talked about earlier, kind of a bad year to need a coach with NHL experience. I feel like it's not a very deep bench of candidates, but let's get into it here. And we'll start with, I think, pretty clearly the consensus top candidate on the market. If you listen to any of the national media, they'll pretty much tell you that. And it's Rick Tocchet.
Mhm.
And as far as his options, it sounds like, I mean, Elliot Friedman this morning on 32 Thoughts podcast said that really Tocchet is kind of interviewing teams. They're not interviewing him. He is in that much of a high demand position in this market as pretty clearly the number one guy. And lots of teams are interested in him. We know the Kraken are interested in him. He's probably been the most linked to the Kraken so far. I mean, according to a report from Frank Saravalli, the Kraken are interested. They have interviewed him and they have offered him the job, which is, pretty big step to take there, but it kind of makes sense given he's the number one candidate. This morning, Elliot Friedman did kind of pour some cold water on that, not on the report that he's been offered the job, didn't dispute that at all, but said probably not going to happen just given the other options that Tocchet has. So he's a guy I think the Kraken would be lucky to get if he wanted to take the job. But I don't know that he will. But let's talk about why he's the number one candidate here. And I know you're a big Rick Tocchet fan. Why is he so sought after?
I mean, I think he checks a lot of the boxes that we talked about wanting to see from the next head coach for the Seattle Kraken. And Rick Tocchet, obviously, this last season in Vancouver was something, but I don't think that you could lay any of the blame at Rick Tocchet's feet. And I think that that's even evidenced by Vancouver kind of wanting to keep him around, which is unusual after you see a team kind of, or locker room, I should say, blow up the way that it did in Vancouver this year, between, most significantly, Elias Pettersson and JT Miller, and how the Canucks kind of had to somehow navigate through all of that. And I think that Rick Tocchet did a really good job of keeping the team focused, keeping the team competitive. They were in it until the last week or so of the regular season as a potential wild card team. And I think a lot of that comes down to what Rick Tocchet does. I think we both talk about structure. Rick Tocchet's system is so well structured, RJ. From an X's and O's standpoint, I love watching Rick Tocchet. If you followed Emerald City Hockey for any amount of time, I've talked about this a lot, whether it's when the Kraken are playing him or over on Patreon, the Red Glare podcast. But he runs a 2-1-2, but has some like fun things in there for a forechecking scheme as far as when to be aggressive, when not to be aggressive. You'd be forgiven if at times it looks like a 1-2-2, just based off of how conservative they can play, but that's the game by game kind of matchup thing that I was talking about earlier, where he takes that into account and will adjust his system in the defensive zone. And I think this is going to be kind of a common thread as we talk about some of these coaching candidates. He plays zone style D, just like the Kraken played last year, which is going to sound scary to a lot of fans because we saw how difficult that was, for the Seattle Kraken last season. But he runs it, and it's interesting because I see some people call it more conservative and other people call it more aggressive, and I'll try to break that down for everybody here. Normally in the zone D system, I've talked about this before. Your D1, your strong side defender, the defenseman that the puck is on, the side of the ice that the puck is on, goes into the corner. They're your primary pressurer of the other team's puck carrier. They're trying to disrupt what the other team is doing as that first body in. Your center or your F1 is usually a secondary piece to assist them or be there in case the defenseman knocks loose the puck. And then you'll have your strong side winger keeping the half board so that the opposing team can't move it up to the point. And then your weak side winger and your weak side defender are both kind of net front and guarding the slot in areas like that. What Rick Tocchet does in the defensive zone is, and I would consider this more aggressive, but I could understand why some people would call it conservative, is he really likes to pull those wingers in. So he adjusts it by bringing in his strong side winger further down on the boards to help assist more directly with whoever the puck carrier is. Just get them involved in the play. Don't worry about if they try to get it out to the point. We'll deal with that if they're able to get there. Just focus on trying to get the puck, right? Puck retrieval, essentially. And then his weak side winger really comes down and isn't, instead of kind of guarding the high slot the way most weak side wingers do in his own defensive system, he drops down and helps out more net front. And I think that that really helps because one of the things that we certainly saw with the Kraken last year struggle the most is if the puck gets moved out of the corner and gets moved into that net front area, just having one defenseman there oftentimes is not enough. The NHL is a very fast league now. The other team is able to pounce on that opportunity and able to outman you right in and around your goaltender. So by having his weak side winger play in closer to the net, play in the lower slot, helps even out that man, advantage that other teams can have if they're able to break through your first line of defense. So I really like that approach from Rick Tocchet. The other thing that I really like about it, and we saw this plenty last year, is if your defenseman is your primary puck pressurer and they get pulled out of position and it's the puck starts moving up the half boards, your defenseman is now very far away from the net. What Rick Tocchet will do is if that happens and the puck starts getting up past the goal line, out of the corner, it starts going up the half boards, the defenseman and his F1, usually his center, switches roles. Now it's the centerman's job to jump in and be that primary pressure, and the D takes a couple steps back. So that way, if the puck does end up getting out to the either the point or goes more dangerously into the slot or net front, that defenseman is just that much closer to being able to go back there, help out, help control a rebound if the shot's able to, be stopped by the goaltender or something like that. And so he's playing his own defensive structure, which just about every team in the league plays, but he puts his own spin on it, and it's one that I do think would answer a lot of the problems that the Kraken had last year in the D zone.
Yeah, so I think he definitely checks that structure box, and good explanation there from you, Dylan. I've heard all this from you before as we've watched, especially when the Canucks come to town and we watch the game, and you are just loving the systems that Rick Tocchet runs and explaining them to me. So I think he definitely checks that structure box. Accountability, I think he certainly checks that box as well for the players. I mean, he would be probably the most I don't know what scale what you want to talk about it, player friendly coach versus I guess more accountability for the players when they're not playing well. He'd be the most on the latter side that the Kraken have ever had. And I mean, I think that might be a reason too why we've seen, because when I posted on social media the report that Tocchet had been interviewed by the Kraken, offered the job and whatever, there was a fair amount of backlash from fans are just like, no, we don't want him. I don't think that's good. But I think a good amount of it might have been because of that accountability necessarily. I mean, I'm quoting a Twitter thread here. It would mean that playtime is over, but I like the playtime. I just want them to have playtime and buckle down at times to win. And then on Instagram, no, please just know he's not a good fit with our community. We are weird.
Yeah, should see that.
I think that might speak to that a little bit as well. By the way, love that comment.
Yeah.
But I do think he certainly brings that accountability for the players that really we haven't seen from a Kraken coach yet.
Yeah, he'd be the most gruff coach that the Kraken
have ever had.
Like I think that's for sure. But you know what? At the end of the day, it's one where the Kraken do need, I think, somebody who can come in and bring that accountability, bring in that structure, and kind of hold these players to task at times. And keep in mind that winning is the priority. Winning is the point of what this organization is going out there and trying to do and what this team needs to accomplish at some point. And so I don't think that it would be that bad kind of having somebody out there because, as much as he would be the most, gruff or whatever coach that the Kraken have had, compared to some of the other guys we're going to talk about, he's still not, a total hardo, as Morgan Geekie would call him.
Yes, I will definitely see some names that would surpass him on this list in that category. A couple more questions on Tocchet, though. I guess someone you can trust with the young players. I mean, do we think he'll be good enough with the youth coming up? I don't think he's the best coach on this list for that, but I think he's good enough.
Yeah, I think he's good enough. Like if you go back to like Arizona days and stuff, working with like a younger Clayton Keller, there we go. Like I think there's some stuff there, even like a Lekiomaki this past season in Vancouver. Like I think there's some there. I think it's just if you're really
Tampa
just going
with Steven Stamkos, even if you want to look back that far.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that there has been some track record there of it, but certainly if you're looking at recent history, Vancouver, this was not a Vancouver team that had a lot of young players coming up and developing. They needed a coach that could kind of try to take them to the next level. That's what he was more so working on. I'm not worried about the young player stuff, but again, it's more of a limited sample size there.
Yeah, and so I think you look at the resume. I guess the last question here is, he has only, I believe, one playoff round ever as an NHL head coach. Only 2 playoff appearances. then you look at, though, he was coaching a very much rebuilding Tampa Bay Lightning team, an Arizona Coyotes team that was, I mean, we know how the dysfunction there and everything
Yep.
did lead them to a playoff appearance, 1920 there. And then this Canucks team, kind of the best team he probably had, and he goes there to the playoffs 1 out of 3 seasons. I mean, is there anything in the resume that worries you necessarily? Or are you willing to kind of give him a pass based on the teams and situations he was put in?
I do think when it comes to like postseason success and even like down the stretch at times, although some of this I think was the player issues in Vancouver, I do think that you could argue that, he's the kind of coach that can get you to the playoffs, but he's not maybe a coach built to win playoff series super consistently. I think that is, until he does it, probably going to be the one thing, like the one mark against him for a lot of these teams looking to potentially bring him in. But I just think that, he hasn't, certainly like this past year in Vancouver, like all that drama and everything, that wasn't him. like
No, it clearly wasn't.
there's always been an issue, whether it's a rebuilding Tampa team, kind of rebuilding Arizona team, plus the issues that they then have, plus COVID pandemic and everything, right? Like there was just so much going on in Arizona, and then in his time in Vancouver, really, if you look at not this most recent past season, but the season before that in Vancouver, where they were able to go on to the playoffs and look pretty decent in the playoffs there against Nashville, I feel like that is more so what we should expect from him if he's just in a stable environment, right? If there's
Yeah.
just going to be a stable front office above him, stable, consistent player group, I feel like you have seen him excel when he has had that. It's just been that has been limited in his coaching experience so far.
I'm with you. I'm not particularly worried about that. Looking at the resume, I do think he does fall short of that top tier of NHL coaches, because those guys have actual, real winning and results, especially in the playoffs, on the resume. But I think on the curve of coaches that we're going to see in the market this year, he's at the very top. I think he's kind of this coach where, look, he's an upper middle tier coach, I'd say, that you're probably going to end up having to pay top tier money. I mean, that's the other reporting that's been going around, is that he's going to get a very big contract.
Yeah.
But the good news is there is no salary cap for coaches. I think that's actually worth explaining just real quick. There's no salary cap for coaches, so teams can spend as much as they want on coaches. And by the way, the Kraken will be paying three head coaches this year, in Dave Haxtell, Dan Bilesma, and whoever they hire next. So, but hey, for a team that has no issue with this ownership group, they spare no expense when it comes to
Mhm.
the hockey, right? I think there's a lot of teams that probably, if they were in the Kraken's position, would be completely out on a Rick Tocchet just for financial reasons, because he would be the third head coach they'd be paying. But clearly that's not the case for the Kraken.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean the what was it? Frank Seravalli, Daily Faceoff, was saying expect it somewhere in the 5 year, 6 million per, territory. Rick Tocchet's gonna be making more than a lot of the players he's coaching.
Yeah, which is rare. I mean, that is
Very
in
rare.
line to be, I believe. I mean, if it's in the 5 year, $6 million range, that's right up there with the richest coach contracts ever in NHL
Yeah.
history.
Yeah, no,
So
he is expected to really help bump up the the number there for coaches all around. The last thing for me on Rick Tocchet, and I know that this was something that some Vancouver media was talking about, Vancouver radio was talking about, that I saw via our friend Mike Benton at KJR's Twitter feed. But it is true, and it was something I thought about too with Rick Tocchet. The Kraken roster is really kind of built to run Rick Tockett's system. Like, we haven't seen a lot of these players put into the spots that Rick Tocchet would put them in, but in theory it should work. And that's being, I talk about defense, and he puts that pressure on his wingers. You have some good defensive wingers on this team. You have Eli Tolvanen, you have Capo Kakko, who's maybe the best amongst the bunch. You have other guys like that. Even a Jared McCann, we know what he can do when he's playing center in the defensive zone. If he's out on the wing, we know that he can be defensive and play well in the defensive zone. So I think that the wingers that the Kraken currently have kind of lend themselves to that approach that he takes in the defensive zone. And then offensively, so much of what he wants to do is he wants to attack with speed, and he wants that speed to be driven from the back end. He wants it driven by the defenseman. It's obviously worked very well for him with Quinn Hughes in Vancouver. You maybe don't have a Quinn Hughes in Seattle, but what you do have is Vince Dunn, Brandon Montour, Riker Evans to a lesser extent. You do have some significant puck movers there that would be able to help lead or feed a transition if you were able to kind of properly get one going, which, yes, the Kraken struggled with last year, but perhaps Rick Tocchet's kind of unique spin on things would be able to, help them get it done.
yeah, I would be excited at the prospect of these Kraken players playing in Tockett's system for sure. And so I think summing it up on Rick Tocchet, I think we both agree, right? Of all the names we're going to talk about, he is the top option for both of us.
Definitely.
And so it's clear
Sounds like for the
why.
team too.
Yeah, I think that's
They
pretty
offered him
clear
the
as
job.
well.
Like that's
Yeah, we
speaks
haven't
pretty
heard
good
that
about
for
it.
any other coaches. I think that speaks volumes there. And so it's just going to come down to whether Tocchet has better options. He feels he has better options or not. And so we'll wait and see. I do think, as I mentioned already last week, I do think the Kraken have probably one of the lesser desirable coaching vacancies. And so I'd be surprised if somebody with the options that Tocchet has ends up coming to Seattle. But if they are able to grab him, I think that'll be a huge get.
Yeah, you're also fighting against like the other teams that are maybe considered have less attractive job openings in say a Pittsburgh or a Philadelphia, that he does have significant history with those two organizations from his playing days. And as much as I'm sure he still is good friends with Ron Francis from their time playing together in
Jason
Pittsburgh,
Botterill.
and Jason Botterill from his time in Pittsburgh as well. I think that it is one of those that if you are Seattle, you have a lot of factors kind of working against you with Rick Tocchet, unfortunately.
Yep. So let's move on to some other names, maybe that are more in a realistic tier and category here. And the next one we'll go to, probably the second biggest name I'd say on the market, depending on
Yeah.
who you talk to, is Jay Woodcroft. So Woodcroft was formerly the coach of the Edmonton Oilers before being let go and replaced by Chris Knobloch. Interestingly, he has a video coaching background, first NHL head coach with the background as a video coach. So I thought that's kind of interesting. He does come from the Todd McLellan coaching tree. So he had kind of started his coaching career as a video coach with the Detroit Red Wings, then followed McLellan to San Jose, then followed McLellan to Edmonton, then was briefly head coach of the Bakersfield Condors of the AHL, did win a Calder Cup there in 2020-21 before taking over as the Oilers head coach. And leading him to a conference final, but then kind of getting progressively worse the next two seasons. He does have among the best winning percentages of any NHL head coach ever, like minimum, it's like 100 games or something. So that's an impressive record with the Edmonton Oilers. But of course, he did coach with McDavid and Draisaitl, and those guys are going to help you out a bit. What are your initial thoughts on Jay Woodcroft?
I think he's a very good coach. I think that, the results kind of speak for themselves. That being said, I worry about structurally what he would bring to the Seattle Kraken and whether or not the Kraken roster is really built to be able to run it. And that's my big concern with Jay Woodcroft. Like I think that he would bring the video coach background is something that I like a lot. I think that that's a really positive thing. I think that the Kraken could probably use more of stuff like that, just based off of how things have gone the last couple of years. I've called for that in the past. But it's one where I look at what he was doing in Edmonton and what ultimately kind of got him fired in Edmonton too. And it was him, I talked about Rick Tocchet putting twists on kind of common systems. It was him trying to do that in Edmonton, and the roster in Edmonton outside of McDavid and Draisaitl not being able to keep up with it. And that ultimately led to a lot of issues. And you could argue he tried to get a little too cute with things for what the roster could kind of handle, and it all kind of blew up on him. Now maybe he learned that lesson. I don't know, but that is what happened. Looking at like forechecking in Bakersfield, he ran a 1-1-3, which I think he could probably instill with the Kraken, and it would probably work pretty good. But in Edmonton, he took over what Tippett had been running, which was a 1-2-2. But they really kind of struggled with that at times if they didn't have Draisaitl or McDavid out there as a centerman, because his twist on the 1-2-2 was to really add a lot of responsibility to the center iceman through the neutral zone as a very aggressive back checker. And it was great when McDavid or Draisaitl was out there in that role because they had the speed and the skill to do it. When the bottom six was out there, it was a lot less effective, and they just kind of got burned a lot by it. And so that was an issue for them. The other thing is he say, just like with Tocchet, just like with the Kraken last year, ran a zone defense. Now, just like with Tocchet, and to a lesser extent the Kraken, it was a zone-based defense that then, when the puck moves up to the point, kind of breaks into more of a man-to-man role while you're waiting then for the puck to get moved down lower. Um, but in his zone structure, they really had issues when trying to make it more aggressive. He was trying to add in more forward help, kind of similar to what Rick Tocchet was trying to do, but again, adding the responsibility more so to the centerman, for Jay Woodcroft, and it just led to them overloading sides and really getting burned. Because if you didn't walk away with the puck retrieval, you just had way too many assets sitting in a corner, and you just weren't able to do anything. And kind of infamously, this is what led to his firing in Edmonton early in well, the 23-24 season, was that work there. And it's one where, as much as I like the defensive responsibility of the centerman that the Kraken have, I just don't know that these kinds of setups or these kinds of experiments with the existing systems would totally work here.
Yeah, and that's where my concern is, especially defensively, because looking at that Oilers team in his final season, I mean, that's some of the worst defensive hockey I have ever seen
Yeah.
at the NHL level. I mean, just it was disastrous for them. And so a change needed to be made there. And so I am concerned about a team that's already, maybe a little bit iffy defensively with, with focus and systems last year. Can he be the guy to fix it? But overall on Woodcroft, with him, I keep going back and forth because I think with him, he has the widest range of potential outcomes
Agreed.
as a coach that you can hire. I could see it working out great. I mean, he works well with the Kraken's young players. He's got a lot of experience there in Bakersfield, working with some guys like Holloway, Broberg, McLeod,
Hmm.
Bouchard. His great NHL win percentage, that just shows he's a really good coach. His more kind of freewheeling system, it's fun to watch too, and it works with last year's good finishing. And then also he'd have by far the best goaltending he has ever had as an NHL
Yes.
head coach. You're not having to work with Stuart Skinner, Mikko Koskinen, the likes of the Oilers goalies, maybe with a Joey Decord, that just makes it look even better. And it also can shore things up defensively if there's some issues. So I could see that happening. I could see it just him being a
Yep.
fantastic fit there, or I could see it just being disastrous. I think I could see the lack of defensive structure looking just reminiscent of that last year's Oilers team before he left. I could see the offensive production that he got in Edmonton just completely drying up because it was all led by their pair of superstars and McDavid and Draisaitl. I could see him even being able to kind of break down the issues on video, try to solve them with that video coach background. But he's then faced with a room of players who kind of don't care and didn't respond to every button that Dave Haxtell and Dan Bilesma pushed over the course of the
Hmm.
last couple seasons. And he's not the kind of, hardo type of coach who I think can command that respect through fear. And if he can't get that, then he's just done. So really, I could see it being a great fit. I could also see it being a disastrous fit. And I have a hard time really seeing anything in between.
Agreed, agreed. And look, as much as I, kind of broke down why things didn't work for him in Edmonton, Edmonton had just such a unique roster where you have two of the top 5 players in the world on your team and then not really anything else to work with. So you're stuck in this really impossible scenario as a coach where you're trying to build systems that give the freedom and creativity and really accentuate what you have in players like a Connor McDavid and a Leon Draisaitl, while at the same time trying to figure out something that works better with everybody else. And I think that in really any other coaching spot, Jay Woodcroft would just be able to build out a system that the whole team could kind of utilize instead of trying to balance between the two and ultimately failing with that, which, to be fair, I feel like a lot of guys probably they already have failed at doing so. And I do think that he would have a really interesting way of looking at this Kraken team and being able to potentially find ways of making it work and bring in some good systems there. It's just, yeah, the structure thing. It's top 2 on both of our lists, number 1 for you, and that's the one place where I maybe have questions with him.
Yeah, same. And you look at the Oilers part of the resume and just that roster construction of Edmonton makes it nearly impossible as a coach to make your mark on a team in a way that you can replicate anywhere
Yeah,
else. And as a result, it makes it just nearly impossible for us to properly evaluate
it does.
looking at it. So I don't know what to make of it.
Yeah, yeah. But that being said, I mean, remarkable run that he had, incredible win percentage, all of that stuff. Like, he should get another spot in the NHL, and I think the Kraken would be better off for having somebody with that winning, pedigree than without.
Yeah, and certainly as we look at the rest of this list, if we had to rank him at the end, as far as our preference, I think he'd rank pretty high
Yeah.
as we go on to these other names. And so let's move on here to Peter Laviolette. I think he is kind of the ultimate second tier recycled NHL head
Yep.
coach. And experience, that was a little further down our list, but it's on both of our lists here. And nobody beats him on
No.
experience. The man has continuously been an NHL head coach since the year 2001.
It's
24
it's
straight
really
years,
impressive.
did not take a break, no time off. And it is really impressive just in itself. I guess the lockout, I guess, was the time he took off, the times that the league has had work stoppages. But other than that, he's just continuously been an NHL head coach. So he is the most experienced of any of these guys that we're going to talk about. There are some connections as well. I mean, and to give you a sense of how long he's been coaching, Ron Francis played for him
Yes.
as a player. Ron Francis, so he coached Ron Francis as a player. So that also gives you an idea of the experience. He's kind of known as a bit of a turnaround king. He will turn teams around pretty fast. They tend to do pretty well in his first season taking over with a new team, and so you could say that's another positive for him if you're trying to turn things right around as the Kraken. That said, a lot of questions about him, particularly with the can he handle the young players? And I think the answer to that, at least, as it was with the New York Rangers, his last spot is a pretty solid no. And we saw that with Capo Caco most prominently, where Laviolette was his coach before getting traded to the Kraken. And so I don't know if those two could even coexist. I think that's the biggest concern there with Laviolette. But I mean, systems wise, style wise, because I think we do have higher on the list of structure and adaptability. What do you think of Laviolette?
Yeah, I didn't go as in depth into things with him just because he has coached so long that, like, if you were to try to build out, like, well, what are his tendencies when it comes to systems? It's everything. He's run everything at some point in time, just because he has coached so much. So really, just to also help, because boy, this time just flies on these podcasts. 40 minutes in already.
Oh man, are
Um,
we really?
yeah, I know. Maybe this turns into a two-parter. I don't know. With Peter Laviolette, I do think he would bring structure. Like, he is going to bring structure. That is the number one thing I feel like he's going to bring in addition to his NHL experience. He's going to bring structure. He's going to command respect in the room. He is going to get these players to play whatever system he decides to go with. And I think that one of the things we have seen from him is he has proven more recently at his last couple coaching stops to be more adaptable based off of what roster he's given than maybe he was earlier in his career. And so I think that there is something there. So I would be curious to see what he decides to kind of do with this Kraken roster and what he decides to run with them. But ultimately, I just think that he would be somebody who you could have confidence in every time the Kraken go out there, that they're going to put their best foot forward. They're going to be competitive. They're going to play to the whistle. And if you're a Kraken fan, that has to sound good.
Yeah, I think it does. But look, this is the trade-off with Peter Laviolette. If you're looking at just trying to make the playoffs next year and that's your only goal, I think he's probably certainly top three on this list for me, maybe top two after Rick Tocchet on this list. That said, I still don't think the trade-off is worth it as far as just handling the young players. I would really worry about that. And I know he's a win now coach, but I think you are probably sacrificing future development for a few extra wins now in a way that I'm not comfortable with. And so I know I've been saying just pick a direction for the Kraken, right? Either you're trying to win now or you're going the rebuild thing. This would be picking a direction,
Mm-hmm.
but I worry about the potential for it to kind of backfire with really the future of your organization, everything that all the basket you've put all the eggs in here. And also with Laviolette too. Like, I think he's a good coach, good mid-tier coach, but not of that highest level. I think there's a
Agreed.
handful of guys who are good enough to justify that endless recycling that we see of
Mm-hmm.
NHL head coaches. I don't think Peter Laviolette is one of them. I think he's kind of a tier below. And so I wouldn't take that risk with the young players. For like, if let's say a Peter DeBoer became available, which, he won't be, but like if he was, if the Stars bowed out early and he was available, I think you are potentially sacrificing development of some young players there, but it's worth it to get a coach of that caliber. I just think Laviolette's kind of a step below that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I don't think that you're going on long playoff runs with Peter Laviolette if you're able to get there, if you're the Seattle Kraken. You mentioned the history with the young players and the development issues there. He is the reason we have Capo Caco, right? Like, it was their relationship deteriorating that made Capo Caco available from the New York Rangers, and Ron Francis was able to go out there and get him. So the idea of bringing in that coach 6 months later to where Capo Caco is, could you could run into issues then with Capo Caco, and
You may have to
certainly
trade him.
yeah, you might have to trade him, and I don't think Laviolette's really worth doing that if you're the Kraken. And you would then potentially run into issues like that with a Berkeley Catton. If the front office wants Berkeley Catton to get 9 games, where does Laviolette really put him in at the lineup, right? Is he going to make him a fourth line winger for those 9 games? You're not really going to be able to judge where Berkeley Catton's at. Yanni Newman, like, what does he do with him? If Jagger Firkus is popping off early next year in Coachella Valley, you want to work him into the roster. Laviolette's not the guy to handle that, realistically the best way possible. And so I think for all of those reasons, I would be very surprised if Laviolette got hired by the Seattle Kraken. He's one of these coaches for these teams that still want to be playoff teams, but are maybe cycling out of their contending window. Like that's really what it feels like his role is. He'll go coach Pittsburgh.
Yeah, exactly. And it just doesn't feel like a fit in Seattle. Now, going from one guy who doesn't feel like a fit in Seattle to another guy who doesn't feel like a fit in Seattle, and would also be maybe questionable with the younger players, John Tortorella. We don't have to spend a ton of time on him because look, we know who he is.
Mm-hmm.
He's a hardo of all
Mm-hmm.
these coaches. He's going to drive him hard and bring that accountability and structure for 1 to 2 years before all the players get sick of him
Before
and
there's
give up on him.
mutiny.
Yeah, before there is a mutiny in the room. Dylan, does that sound good to you? Is that what we want?
No, it doesn't sound good to me at all. It sounds good in the sense that you accurately summed up John Tortorella there. Again, he's one of those guys. He has that hardo persona when it comes to dealing with his team. I think he's kind of a softie off the ice and stuff. But it's one of those where I don't see in any way how this makes sense for the Kraken to potentially bring in somebody like this. Almost everything we said about Peter Laviolette, you could also say about like handling the young players, system structures, all of those things about John Tortorella. Only I think that it's at a tier below where Laviolette's at right now, where like Laviolette has been around for a long time, but has done a fairly good job of like keeping up with the larger developments around the NHL and finding ways of changing and adapting his systems to his rosters and what the overall league is kind of doing. Tortorella has not done as good a job at doing that. He's still very much thinking and trying to get teams to play for an era of hockey that just doesn't totally exist anymore. And that just seems counter to what the Kraken are trying to do on both fronts of either trying to be better immediately or trying to grow and develop their young players. It just doesn't line up.
Yeah, so I think that's a pass there. We probably don't need to spend too much time on John Tortorella. I'll give you one last chance to just talk about how he isn't actually a nice guy off the ice.
He is actually a nice guy off the ice. Does a lot of work for like pet rescues, big dog lover, all of that kind of stuff. He's always been very nice every time I've ever had to deal with him, both before the ECH gig and since we've been doing ECH. He is a nice guy and all of that stuff. You just don't want to be, say, a player who makes a defensive mistake in a game and then has to skate back to his bench.
Well said. So I think we've given the old balanced take on Tortorella there. So moving on here. Next, we have David Quinn, someone who I think we both identified a couple of weeks ago, talking before the podcast. It's like, oh man, this is who it's going to be, right? We just had a feeling. I know you've backed off of that a little bit, but explain to everyone why, because I think you found him first, right? Why you arrived at David Quinn and initially thought, oh man, this is going to be the next head coach.
I don't even totally remember because it was like a month ago now, but it just everything about him just feels like it. He has the NHL coaching experience. He's a head coach with the Rangers, head coach with the Sharks more recently. So he has that. Went and worked under Mike Sullivan in Pittsburgh this last season as a power play and defensive coach. There, taking over for Tom Reardon, who definitely needed to move on there in Pittsburgh. I'm working off of him because so much of what the criticisms were for him in San Jose and the criticisms in New York were that he had issues working with the younger players. Specifically, and that includes Capo Caco for his first 2 seasons in the National Hockey League. So again, you might run into issues with Capo Caco being on the roster. But like a common criticism in San Jose was, San Jose was very clearly needing to go through their hard rebuild and everything, and he just refused to play young players. or at least not until it was extremely late in a very obviously lost season, and then they'd finally come in and look okay, and you're like, why didn't they get this ice time 40 games ago, dude? And I just don't think that that's what the Kraken want when we were already wondering about that under somebody like Coach Dan.
Right, and it wasn't like favoring the veterans in San Jose led to better results or more wins.
Yeah,
I mean,
no,
he
you were
was
losing
the
anyway.
guy that got the Sharks to the absolute basement that allowed them to draft Macklin Celebrini. And so I think if the Kraken were going in the direction of, hey, let's try and get Gavin McKenna or Landon DuPont, and that's really the goal here, I actually think Quinn would be a really good fit and a good idea
Yeah.
as the coach here, but I don't think that's what the Kraken are trying to do. And so I know you looked for, what he did systems wise with the Rangers and with the Sharks, and I know you couldn't find anything with the Sharks. It was a total black hole. Nobody documented what he did systems wise with San Jose, but I did watch some of those teams, of course, growing up a Sharks fan, still paying a little bit of attention to that. And I can tell you the system was just let Erik Karlsson do whatever the hell he wants, and everybody else can kind of just like look at it. That was basically the system while he was there.
Yeah, the one, like, I found a Sharks fan on YouTube trying, like, talking about it, and that was like the most I could find. And that's basically what they said too. It was Erik Karlsson and then like 4 practice cones. Like that
Yeah.
was the team that they were out there rostering under him. But he does have connections to Jason Botterill, going back a ways and stuff like that. And so there are some connections there that I think is what ultimately led us to think that he might be involved in here. That, and he is being talked about for other job openings, including teams like Boston and Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, where he was part of Sullivan's staff, and it sounds like he could be the guy to take over there. So he is somebody that is well thought of in these circles, RJ, even though I can't totally pinpoint a bunch of reasons that Kraken fans specifically should think positively of bringing him in.
Yeah, and I think how we got to the point where we're like, oh, he'd be the guy is that we were talking about Mike Sullivan and how he would be the ideal fit, of course. But we figured the Kraken probably wouldn't be able to get Sullivan just given how highly in demand he was. We then, I think, joked about Todd Reardon as like, okay, well, who's the guy under Sullivan? And wait, no, he's not there. So who's the guy who took over Reardon's spot? And it was David Quinn. And you're like, actually, he's had 2 jobs as an NHL head coach before. He checks a lot of those kind of superficial boxes as far as experience. And then we were looking at how the power play did as well in Pittsburgh. And I think they did have the 6th ranked power play
It was pretty
in the
good,
NHL
yeah.
last season. It was a very good power play. That said, I think you lean pretty heavily on a Crosby, Malkin, and Erik Karlsson. So it's a pretty good unit. The whole team wasn't good. They didn't have depth. But if you're just picking a top 5 guys, you've got some pretty good players to work with.
Yeah, although the second unit also had some good numbers for, a second unit that was not consisting of very many notable names on that Pittsburgh Penguins team. So there might be something there as for what he could bring to the power play. But if he becomes head coach, RJ, he won't be in charge of the power play. So
Right. So I think that does defeat some of the purpose there. But anyway, that's David Quinn, and I don't know. It felt like for a little while we're like, oh, this would be the guy.
yeah.
So now going on to somebody who also has some connections here, and especially with Jason Botterill, and that is Don Granato. So he was the Sabres coach who took over actually right after Botterill left there in Buffalo, and so he's somebody who's being mentioned again. He would be a second-time NHL head coach. So he had that previous stint with the Buffalo Sabres, and as we know, running everything down with Jason Botterill, he didn't lead them to the playoffs, but nobody does. That's just not what you do in Buffalo. And so I think he's somebody that people have looked at as maybe deserving of another shot as an NHL head coach. Before that, he was an assistant with the Chicago Blackhawks, but also worked with the U.S. National Team Development Program from like 2013 to 2016. Worked with some very good players in that program: Austin Matthews, Matthew Tkachuk, Charlie McAvoy, Tage Thompson, Clayton Keller. I mean, so much talent on that roster that he got the chance to work with there. What do you think about Don Granato?
I think if you're the Kraken and you're taking more of a we want to focus on the youth movement approach, I think Don Granato makes a lot of sense actually for you, and I think would be a good coach for any team kind of looking to let their young players develop in a situation where he is going to, and this is what he did in Buffalo, he is going to give them ice time and he is going to give them significant responsibilities, right? Like in Buffalo, he looked at their young players, and this is very much what what it just seems like his overall philosophy is, if these are the players that are supposed to be this franchise, they're the guys and they've got to learn it at some point. And so he goes ahead and he throws them in the deep end a little bit and lets them sink or swim. And honestly, I think that is the approach. I think that that's much better than overly sheltering young players. We've talked about this, limiting ice time, all of that stuff. Go ahead, put them in the situations that they're going to run into at the NHL level and let them learn in that situation and let them grow. So in that sense, I feel like if the Kraken want to take a longer term approach, really work in prospects, be a little bit more patient with things, Don Granato is not a bad option there, just because he's going to do a lot of that. On the flip side, with that came a lot of lack of structure in Buffalo, something that players ended up starting speaking up about, and ultimately led to him getting his dismissal in Buffalo. You had players like Alex Tuck talking about how the team was just did not have enough structure, while he was still coach. By the way, Alex Tuck is saying this, so not great there. You also had a very common complaint amongst Sabres fans as I was going back and looking at things of there was never any adjustments, like just zero adjustments with Granato. So those are things that kind of give me pause. But I think that, with a team, and maybe this is really more so works for a team closer to like where a Chicago is, or a Philadelphia that's really got to focus on young players. If you're just strictly focusing on young players and putting them in positions to develop, I think Granato's your guy. If you're like the Kraken, where you have some young players who you want to develop, but you also want to be out there winning and trying to push towards the playoffs, I don't know that he's the guy to kind of get you there. He very much feels like a strict player development coach to me.
Yeah, and I think we have a pretty similar read on Don Granato. I mean, you look at those Buffalo Sabres teams, and he did give young players a lot of opportunity. The structure wasn't there, the wins didn't come with it. And so if you're looking for somebody for maybe a 2 to 3 year time frame to kind of grow along with the team, he's a good option. But I cannot believe that that's what the Kraken are looking for right now. I just don't think that's the case. And if you're expecting him to have any kind of success as far as contending for a playoff spot, there's zero reason to believe that he can get you there. I mean, Dylan, I talked to you about this a little bit before we started recording, and I had you guess when the last time that Don Granato has made the playoffs at any level of coaching was. And you guess somewhere around, like Quenneville's last playoff round in 2015. It's over 10 years beyond that. 2004 is the last time that Granato has made the playoffs at any level as a head coach, when he led the Worcester Ice Cats to a second round exit in the AHL at that time. And so just he has done nothing in his resume here that suggests that he can get you to a playoff spot. And I think that's ultimately where the Kraken want to go sooner rather than later. And so the resume is a disqualifier for me, and also missing structure, which is my number one thing on Granato. And also just the optics wise, I don't like the look of doubling down on being Sabres West.
Yeah, no, you probably
Not for me.
it's probably not the franchise you want to do that with. I will say, to be fair, it wasn't like he was head coaching that entire time. That
Yeah.
he went between playoff wins. So just to throw it out there, it's not like he coached for 25 years and just never never won anywhere. There's a lot of that time where he wasn't a coach. But yeah, no, I'm with you. Like I don't think that this is the guy to help the team take that next step to becoming a playoff contender. Like just a playoff contender, not even make the playoffs, but just be like the 9 or 10 seed in the West. I don't even know that Granato gets you there.
Yeah, he's definitely not the win now option here on this list. And I think this category of these last three really are ones where you'd look at maybe a kind of coach that could kind of grow with the team, somebody a little bit on the other side. These last two names we have are the 2 out of the 8 that do not have any NHL head coaching experience yet. And that's Jay Leach and Mitch Love. And we'll start with Jay Leach because we know him a little bit better. I think Kraken fans are kind of more familiar with him. He was an assistant coach for 3 years under Dave Haxtell with the Kraken, so he knows the organization there. He was in charge of the defense during that time. When Bilesma came and took over, he left to go back to the Boston Bruins organization. He was an assistant coach there this past season. Not the best result for the team there, but Leach was there on staff. And of course, prior to that, he was the head coach of the Providence Bruins for 4 years. And so Jay Leach, we know him. We're familiar with him. We've heard very good things about him from Kraken players in the past. I think Hayden Fleury called him the best coach he's ever had.
Mm-hmm.
And we both figure he'll probably be an NHL head coach someday. He's still very young. He's 45. And what do we think about Jay Leach as a head coach now, is now the time and place for him to get that first shot?
It feels like it could be. That's a very strong answer, I know, but no, it does feel like this would be a really good opportunity for somebody like a Jay Leach to get their first head coaching opportunity. Right? It is a team that is wanting to take certain steps forward. They have a direction ish that they want to be going in as far as being more competitive, but it's also one where if you're somebody stepping in for the first time as an NHL head coach, you're going to have a little bit of room to work within, right? And I think that kind of helps things. I think having the rapport with the players already, having a rapport with the front office already is huge. And I think that would be something where you would have, by bringing him in, you would have the front office and the coaching staff very much in line with each other, right? They're going to be thinking along the same terms. They're going to understand what, they expect from each other, all of that stuff. I think that's huge, especially for a Kraken organization that is looking at their third coach in 3 years. I think having some form of stable communication there and a level of understanding would not be a bad thing. And look, the Kraken were way better defensively under Jay Leach, right? Like I can't speak to everything that he's going to do as a head coach, but from like a systems perspective, but like defensively, this team night and day difference between last season and what they were able to do under Jay Leach. Yes, there was some regression year three, but still they were a lot better, and it was just by basic stuff, being a little bit more conservative, more of an effort made net front in the defensive zone, force opponents to the outside, get a lot of shot suppression going against them. Like these are just very basic things that the Kraken really struggled with last season that I think Jay Leach could come back and really help shore up. And in front of Joey Daccord, I feel like that could be like a big thing. You could have a really solid defensive unit here, and if the offense is able to kind of score at the same rate, you are looking at a playoff team just from that one fix alone.
Yeah, and I think defensively, the improvements could certainly be there. He'll be familiar with a lot of the defensemen on the roster. I think he could work well with that group. I do think we need to remember too, though, that how it worked, a couple years ago, even when the defense was good numbers wise, is it did expose goalies to a lot of like really high danger chances against,
Yeah.
which Philip Grubauer struggled with, but Joey Daccord made it
He's
work.
built for it. Yeah.
He is built for it, as we saw again this season too, when the defense was just a kind of a mess all around. So it actually has a chance of working. And really, if we were to rank these coaches, Jay Leach is surprisingly high on this list for me. Going into it, because I mean, when I first thought of him, and when he was mentioned, I think, well, I really don't want anyone who's been part of this Kraken organization before. Kind of like the GM thing, I really would prefer an outside hire, but it does make sense on paper from a lot of the defensive standpoint. I do worry a little bit about if you just kind of go back to where you were a year ago, where the defense improves, but nobody can score. And I think that's part of the reason the scoring was up so much this past season, is because the defense was largely sacrificed and you were trying to move the puck up so aggressively. You did kind of sell out defensively to get some offense this year. And so you better be sure you add some good
Mm-hmm.
forwards. And of course, that's not something that Jay Leach can control, but if you're the Kraken, you better add some of those guys. So I actually don't hate the idea of a Jay Leach. But I also look at the resume, and that concerns me a little bit too, because just given how Boston did this season, and also with the Providence Bruins, like he still never won a playoff round as an AHL head coach. And, compared to some other people you could look at, like even a Todd Nelson, who has won Calder Cups before, Leach's resume, I think, is fairly lacking.
It is. I guess you could give him sort of a pass for being extremely young when all of that happened, right? Like so it was very early on, and you could look at that as very much like, look, this is just coaching development time for somebody rather than what the finished product is going to be. Like that, I think would be a way of looking at it on the other side. But the next guy we're going to talk about kind of blows that whole argument up, right? Like that's part of the problem is once we get to Mitch Love. So yeah, I don't know. I think it would work. I think that with any first time NHL head coach, I think the staff is going to play a big role in things. What kind of staff they can assemble. I think Jay Leach does have good, it seems like he should have anyway, good connections around the league, and a lot of people think highly of him around the league. So in my mind, that means he should be able to assemble a pretty good staff. But I think that it's one where whenever you're talking about a first time head coach, you're talking about them having to have a good staff around them.
Yeah, I think he could use that kind of support, but he could also get it. And also we'll see, who gets retained of the assistant coaches as well, especially if, there is that, in a weird way, continuity with Leach and somebody who has been with the organization as well. So, we'll see what that looks like. Then the final person on this list, unless you had anything else on Jay
Nope.
Leach, is Mitch Love, somebody who people in the area might remember for his time with the Everett Silvertips from 2012 to 2018 as an assistant coach. He since went on to be the head coach of the Saskatoon Blades, and then spent a couple years as an AHL head coach with the Calgary organization. And we were talking about Jay Leach not having won a playoff round, despite being a young AHL coach. I mean, Mitch Love blows that whole thing up. He's a head coach for 2 years in the AHL, wins 3 playoff rounds in those 2 years, has fantastic results with that organization, all the way, by the way, being in his 30s at that time
Yes.
too. So still very young as a coach. Then gets a job with the Washington Capitals as an assistant coach under Spencer Carberry. And of course, we saw the work that Spencer Carberry and that Capitals coaching staff did with that team this year and how impressive that was. And so very fast riser, Mitch Love, and he has been mentioned by a couple national media people with connections to the Kraken, of course, also given his time in Washington and juniors with Everett. So what do you think of Mitch Love as a head coaching candidate? Because he is actually very high on this list for me.
Yeah, he's very high on the list for me. It sounds like he's pretty high on everybody's list. To be perfectly honest, every team that we see, it sounds like wants to talk to Mitch Love. You mentioned several things. You mentioned him being a coach with the Silvertips, legendary Silvertips player, number retired by the Silvertips.
Yeah, there's that as well. Yes.
It would be a massive homecoming for anybody that remembers him from playing with the Silvertips from 03 to 05. So that would be huge there with him. But yeah, I just think like he brings so many interesting things to the table. Obviously, it's a crazy fast trajectory in terms of coaching. Like, retire from his playing career, goes to Everett for a long time, works under, I believe, 3 different head coaches focusing on defense with the Everett Silvertips, works with a lot of guys who went on to have NHL careers in that capacity. Goes and becomes Saskatoon Blades head coach for his first head coaching experience. It's at the WHL level. Doesn't have playoff experience, but is able to win a lot at the regular season level. It's like a 680 something win percentage down there, and then comes up, coaches at the AHL level with Calgary, and just wins casually back-to-back Coach of the Year honors. Like, it's unheard of for somebody just to do that, and then from there goes and joins Spencer Carberry's staff, which has done phenomenal work in Washington with what the Capitals are able to accomplish. And he's been working with the defensemen there. And you could really look at the defensive unit that Washington has and say that's partly why this whole ship has been going so well for them this past season, is having the defensemen not just step up offensively, but also shore things up in front of Logan Thompson and Charlie Lindgren. So I think he is one that definitely teams should be talking to. I think that there is something that, obviously, he just has a great ability to connect with players, to communicate with players, and build that relationship, and they just want to play for him. Structure seems to be something that is very good with him as well, especially if, like I said, if you're just looking at the Washington blue line like that, it's there's a lot of names there doing stuff that I didn't think they were capable of, and I think that speaks highly of the coaching that they're getting. I think what makes it interesting, and why I think that the Kraken could have the chance at him, is that PNW, Silvertips connection, because otherwise, when you're talking about the Boston Bruins being interested in you, and you're talking about all of these other teams, I think that it might be hard for Seattle to maybe stand out in that group. But given how connected he is to the area, and how much this area must have meant to him, and everything, I really do wonder if that helps the Kraken here, where he can come in and try to build a legacy at the NHL level in the same place he was able to build a big junior legacy.
Yeah, and I think it might be the case too. I mean, we'll see how the rest of the coaching carousel goes, and if he does get another head coaching offer from another team. But it could be the case that if if you want someone like this, you might have to offer him now, which might seem a
Hmm.
little early for him, of course, being only 40 years old. But with coaches that are fast risers, I mean, I think of a Warsofsky, in San Jose last year, where you
Yeah.
might have to offer them a little bit earlier, and that's the case. And so he really does go against, a lot of what I was saying earlier about the experience and the resume and all that sort of thing. But the more I look at this list of the coaches who do have the experience and the resume and just the kind of meh reaction I have from a lot of them, Mitch Love just looks like a better option.
He does. No, he does. I mean, we were talking about it. I don't know if we're going to try to rank all of these guys, but like outside of Rick Tocchet, probably excites us both the most.
Yeah, I agreed. I think he'd be number two on my list. I didn't do a whole ranking here, but he would be pretty solidly number two. And I'm very surprised to see that going in because I don't know. I was really thinking you really want somebody with NHL experience who's not going to kind of grow with the team, but just as after looking at the field, I think Love kind of rises toward the top.
Yeah, I just think when you see such a fast trajectory like that, like again, there's something there. This is not the kind of thing where you can just do this through connections, right? Like Mitch Love is not going from WHL assistant coach to WHL head coach to AHL head coach with all of the success along the way, and then NHL assistant and having phenomenal success in just 2 seasons there. Like that tells you that there is something here, and I think that it's worth betting on. Like when you see
Yeah.
somebody have that rise, I think it's worth betting on. Know that there's going to be growing pains, like there is for anybody. We just kind of talked about it with Jay Leach, right? Like there's going to be growing pains for anybody who is going to be becoming an NHL head coach for the very first time. But I feel like when you're talking about somebody who so clearly understands hockey today, as Mitch Love clearly does, based on the fact that he just wins everywhere he goes, I think that it's worth taking that chance. It's worth suffering through whatever those growing pains are going to be, and then hopefully, yeah, you land on somebody that not only helps this franchise get to where they want to be, but like I said, is able to really kind of carve out a legacy and build a legacy for themselves and become synonymous with your franchise.
Yeah. And so I think that's kind of ultimately my philosophy, which I guess it shouldn't surprise me too much going in, is I think there's a certain number of guys that are the experienced, the legit NHL head coaches with that experience and with that success in the past, that you should always prioritize those guys as a coach, pretty much, if you're trying to be competitive at all, unless you're going into a rebuild. And looking at this field, there's only one of those guys, maybe one of those guys there, and it is Rick Tocchet. And if you can't get him, you try and target somebody with a trajectory like this.
Yeah, definitely. You want that needle
All right.
pointed up, not kind of plateaued or maybe even downward like some of the other guys we talked about.
Yep. Agreed. So these are the eight that we thought were, either most connected to the Kraken or potentially most realistic. And there's a whole lot of other names out there. As we mentioned at the start of the podcast, I mean, we could have done a list of 20, 25 guys, made this a 4-hour coaching deep dive special, but we don't want to do that. But I know you had some honorable mentions, and we each do have one surprise coach that we wanted to make the case for. Do you want to go first or should I go first?
Yeah, well, here I'll go first with the honorable mention, and there's like names like Marco Sturm on here and Jay Pandolfo, and I think that like Pandolfo would be like an absolute pipe dream, huge get from Boston University, but it's not happening. Sounds like he doesn't even want to leave the NCAA level. I'll just start with my one honorable mention, just because he feels like an honorable mention on every single like blog post of any team looking for a head coach, and that is Todd Nelson, who you mentioned earlier, who is the Hershey Bears head coach right now. He is the coach that outdueled Dan Bilesma in those 2 Calder Cup finals that the Firebirds lost. That was Todd Nelson on the other side of things. And if you look at Todd Nelson's just time at the AHL coaching ranks, RJ, because he had some NHL assisting in there mixed in that kind of broke this up. In 3 of the last 4 full seasons that Todd Nelson has coached, as Hershey is going on to their conference final in the AHL level now, or semifinal, he has won the Calder Cup. 3 of his last 4 seasons coaching in the AHL level, he's won a championship. It's significant. Like that he checks the box of winning, absolutely. We've seen those Hershey Bears teams. He plays with structure. He gets his guys to play. They're a very professional squad when you come in and you have to deal with them and stuff. Like he is a good one. And RJ, I found the connection too, because you might be wondering what would be a connection here for Todd Nelson. In 91-92, on the Pittsburgh Penguins team that included names like Rick Tocchet, who we talked about earlier, and of course Ron Francis, Todd Nelson played one game for them. So
That's all you need.
that's all you need. There has to be there had to be at some point some level of interaction between Ron Francis and Todd Nelson in 91-92 when Todd Nelson was hanging around for his one whole game of NHL experience that season.
There you go. You found the connection, and that's very necessary. You have to have some kind of connection somewhere, and there it is. One game that make for a good question. If he was hired too, we have to ask at the presser, like, all right, do you remember this one game?
Yes.
Did you talk like what happened there?
Yeah, exactly. So that's the honorable mention who I do think should be involved, and I think a lot of teams are going to also look at that. And I will also say, nearly 500. He's the one time he has been an NHL head coach. It was with the Edmonton Oilers. He took over mid-year after they fired Dallas Eakins. It was a rough time. This was the year that they were tanking for Connor McDavid, and he nearly went 500. Go back. There are Oilers fans who are like, he's too good. We're going to lose out on Connor McDavid because Todd Nelson has us too close to 500. So there is that.
There you go. I mean, hey, what a good fit for the Kraken is all last season. We were talking about like, no, they're winning too much, at the end, they're too good. So maybe that is a positive sign as well. So I do like that. And we had talked about Todd Nelson even last year when we did this whole coaching conversation. I think he'd be a fairly solid hire, and I think he's ready for a look at the NHL level.
Yeah, I do too. So who is your mystery candidate? You've been teasing me with this since last night, RJ. I want to hear it.
Yeah, and you haven't figured it out. You haven't even gotten particularly close. You were sniffing around a little bit here. It's John Stevens.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay. So someone I figured you'd be familiar with, right?
Yeah.
So he checks a lot of the boxes that I look for, and especially with the resume that he has. I mean, he's been a head coach at the NHL level. I mean, technically 3 separate times, but really 2 times. So he has that NHL experience. He's been an assistant coach for a long time in the NHL, but you dig into the resume, and I think it just makes a pretty strong case. He starts as an NHL head coach at the Philadelphia Flyers in 06-07. They're, had a really rough year there. I mean, one of the biggest like points drops from one year to the next in NHL history. But then the next year he brings them back. They're a 95-point team in 07-08. They get to the conference finals, has a good season with the Flyers. And then, they make the playoffs the next year. He's fired a year after that. But that season that he's fired, like they're still, looking pretty competitive. They're 13-12 still. Like it's not, the worst record there. And of course they do go on to the Cup final that year. He joins the LA Kings as an assistant coach, is a head coach for 4 games in between Terry Murray and Daryl Sutter. But he's on that Kings coaching staff for all of their dynasty years there, through the 2 Stanley Cups as well. And then he gets named the head coach of the Kings once they, get rid of Daryl Sutter there, takes over a Kings team that's really at the end of their competitive window. And so has one season with them, losing the first round of the Golden Knights, and they get rid of him really early the next year. I mean, they fire him 13 games in after kind of a rough start, bring in Willie Desjardins, but Desjardins doesn't fix really anything. And so then they have to kind of go into their rebuild. But like, honestly, solid resume, as a head coach. And I think, as Greg Wyshynski, I think, said, I found a tweet from him at the time saying this is 100% a composition problem, not a coaching problem at that time with the LA Kings. And I remember it too. Like it was clear that roster was simply not good enough. So then he goes on and he's an assistant coach at the Dallas Stars for 3 years, including their Cup final run in 2020 there, and then joins the Vegas Golden Knights as an assistant and works under Bruce Cassidy. So he's been around some good coaches like Rick Bowness in Dallas, Bruce Cassidy in Vegas, and that's what he's been doing recently. A lot of success there. He's there in Vegas for their Stanley Cup win as well. So he's got a lot of recent success as an assistant. He has the resume with the time as a head coach and even a conference finals appearance, which is more than a lot of these other guys can say. So he's got the winning, he's got the NHL experience. I think he is someone you can trust to handle young players. You look at his time with the Flyers with a Mike Richards, a Jeff Carter, even a young Claude Giroux, helping them in their like age 21 to 23, 24 seasons and really their formative years in the NHL. And they went on to have very good careers and of course coached them in LA as well to have the success that they went on to have. I think you look at structure and accountability. I mean, I don't remember a ton from his time as a head coach with LA. I know, think he's a little bit more of a player's coach, but working under a Rick Bowness or a Bruce Cassidy. I mean, if that's not going to
Yeah.
teach you structure and accountability, like you look at the coaching staffs he's been involved with recently, he checks all the boxes for me, and I'm surprised he's not getting talked about more as a coaching candidate here.
Yeah, and won a Calder Cup also, coaching in the AHL level for Philadelphia
Yeah.
before joining the big squad there. So yeah, it's one where no, that makes a lot of sense. Like he could be in line for his kind of third chance. Like I like this as somebody who goes and learns and is part of more successful organizations as an assistant, and then kind of comes back around for another crack at the big job. I'm not opposed to it.
And one more connection too. And I know the organization wants everything coordinated from top to bottom and everyone on the same page. You know who he was on the same coaching staff with? They were both assistants under Bonus with the Dallas Stars for all 3 of those years.
Who?
It was Derek Laxdal.
Oh,
so there's
okay.
already a ton of familiarity there between Stevens and Laxdal. And so from the AHL to the NHL, you'd have to think there's the familiarity there. They'd be on the same page.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's a good one. That's a good one. RJ, for mine, what profession have you always said produces the best NHL head coaches?
Attorneys.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. So it is Rico.
It is Rico. Yeah. No, my candidate is Rico Tessendor. If you want to talk to the man who's going to be the next head coach of the Seattle Kraken, feel free to call 425-778-9800 for a free consultation if you're in need of a personal injury attorney while he's still doing it. No, as much as I would love to just have that be like the ultimate segue ever, it is not. But you've always said that attorneys make the best NHL head coaches. You've always had 2 guys specifically that you talk about a lot as former attorneys who have been successful NHL head coaches that you just absolutely love, and that is Pete DeBoer and John Cooper. Am I correct?
Yes, that is all correct. Yes,
just yes or no, please. Okay. While you're on the stand, just yes or no is fine. What if I was to say that there is somebody who is an assistant for both of them this year that they both think extremely highly of and has been, working up in the coaching ranks just in the last couple seasons, is on the younger side, 47 years old, and somebody that they both think highly of? Would you be interested in that individual?
Yes.
Okay.
Potentially. You said yes or no?
Yes. Yes or no. Do you know who it is that I'm talking about?
I think I do.
Yeah.
Is it Misha Donskov?
It is Misha Donskov, yes. And so assistant right now in Dallas under Pete DeBoer. His coaching background really has just been as an assistant coach to Pete DeBoer, both in Dallas and then previously in Vegas. But in Vegas, prior to becoming an assistant coach on Pete DeBoer's staff there, he was brought in because he has a background in scouting and player development. He was brought in by Vegas in 2015 to help them prepare for the expansion draft. While then he was involved with Vegas, he got heavily involved in analytics because that was very much the time when analytics was starting to come into the NHL and become a bigger thing. They promoted him to director of hockey ops and analytics. So he was Vegas's first analytics person. So he has a background in that side of things off the ice. So you're talking scouting, player development, and analytics, because he's also worked significantly with younger players as well in his past. And then now an assistant coach under Pete DeBoer, and then was an assistant coach for Team Canada at the Four Nations Face-Off this past year. He was the only NHL assistant coach to be on Canada's bench there. Canada's bench was John Cooper as head coach, Pete DeBoer, Bruce Cassidy, and Rick Tocchet as assistant coaches, and Misha Donskov. It's pretty good company, and it kind of tells you the level that these other top coaches kind of think of him at. And he's just kind of like this unique background of everything, of scouting, of player development, of analytics, of working with players on the ice level, right, as an assistant. And everybody just has nothing but nice things to say about him, and everybody just says, like, we wish we had it. And so if you have guys like John Cooper being like, yeah, I wish I had him, I got to imagine the Kraken should be saying, wow, wish we had him. And so if he's interested in being a head coach, I think that that's somebody that you can go and look at and potentially try to give that first head coaching opportunity to, just because jack of all trades should be able to help out in a lot of different areas. And everybody who I trust and respect their opinions of has a very high opinion of him.
I love that pick. I mean, I am like blown away by this. I was wondering who your secret guy would be, and I don't think it could have been better. And I was trying to see if like he's been talked about, right, in circles as far as NHL head coaches. I see the Bruins might have some interest. I'm just looking at like news articles and
It's
stuff.
kind of like the only one. Yeah.
Yeah, but this headline: Bruins must hire Misha Donskov as head coach. Here's why. Yeah, I mean, I think that'd be a great option if the Kraken did hire him. I would think, man, this is kind of a forward thinking hire from a team that, at least, at one time was, thought to be known for that sort of thing. So I love that option. I mean, he might be even above Stevens there. You might have outdone me here with the surprise pick.
Yeah, I mean, he's
I think there's less certainty. It depends what you're going for. Stevens, of course, you've got the experience there as a head coach, and there's probably more on the resume there. Donskov, it's kind of in the Mitch Love type category where you're going for somebody with a really good trajectory and up and comer. But I do love that pick. I'm sorry, anyone who's been involved with the Pete DeBoer coaching staff there, and especially like through Vegas and Dallas, like that's. And also brought in by Gallant too, like just those three coaches
yeah.
that you've worked under and just rising the way that he has, sign me up.
Yeah, and also has worked as a video coach for Team Canada in the past. Has worked this is the one potential like flaw in all of this is he has only ever been a head coach once, and that was for Canada's Team Blue at the U17 development tournament. So
Yeah, I don't know if you could even really call that a head coaching gig.
You really can't. So there is no proper head coaching experience, and so then to be thrown into at the NHL level, highest level in the world, as your first time really properly being a head coach, I think is a lot. But I think if anybody can handle it, I think Donskov could handle it, and I think that he just has that pedigree. I mean, you just go back, if you look at like his team staff history on like elite prospects. I mean, it goes back to 2001, joining the Columbus Blue Jackets as a team consultant, as lead instructor in youth hockey development programs. Like that's
Okay.
how his NHL like trajectory has started. Went on, has been an assistant coach at the OHL level and had success there with the London Knights, working under the Hunters. Like again, if you want to go for even bigger names in coaching, right? Like you go down there and you're talking about being involved with the Hunter, with Dale Hunter at the London Knights, like you and Mark Hunter, like you can't get bigger than that at the OHL level. Like he is just somebody that at every level the biggest names around want him as part of their squad, and I think that that's something that the Kraken should want to emulate.
Yeah, I mean that sounds like something someone you'd want to bring on board. And yeah, I mean, again, I think you probably there is a bit of a learning curve if you do hire him as an NHL head coach. That is the big concern. I was looking at assistant, associate,
His
assistant,
video
assistant,
coach, yeah, director of
video
hockey
coach.
ops.
Yeah. So I mean, he's
different.
been kind of all over the place, but man, he's someone you'd love to have in your organization
Definitely.
in whatever respect, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So that was my sneaky candidate there as a potential option for the Kraken. We'll see what they end up doing. We are just a little over on time by 24-ish minutes. It's fine. It's fine.
It's the coach deep dive. It's supposed to be a big thing.
It was, and I know that this was really, a lot of people were looking forward to this. Hopefully, we were able to talk about everybody and go in depth enough for everyone. Of course, want to hear everybody out there what your opinions are of all of these coaches, who you want to see the Kraken hire, or at least what kind of coach you want to see them hire. Feel free to leave that in the comments. I look forward to reading all of those. Want to thank you all for listening. Want to thank Rico one more time for sponsoring the pod again. While we hope none of you ever need his services, the odds say at some point someone out there will be involved in an accident, whether on the road, at work, or anywhere in between. And when you are, we hope you call for that free consultation with Rico at 425-778-9800 or visit his website, ricotessendor.com. He's won millions of dollars for his clients and helped thousands of people in the greater Seattle area. And as a fellow member of the ECH community, we know he'll help you too. And then also, quick reminder, and I think we'll probably record something and stick it in a little earlier too, RJ. Prospect Chat tonight. live game
Yes.
commentary over on Patreon on Wednesday. So this will be
At 4 o'clock. We now know the time for that game. The NHL's
Yep,
announced.
should be a good game 5 too between Toronto and Florida, or I should say Florida and Toronto, as it's going back to the GTA.
Yep, the game will in fact happen. We were worried about that after a couple games, but yes, we will. We'll see you all then.
Worried.
Oh yeah, go back and listen to the Red Glare podcast, the patrons, and see if Dylan sounds worried.
Don't. It's fine. Don't join the Patreon. It's fine. Don't need to listen to that at all.
Yeah, don't join the Patreon, everybody. Wouldn't want to hear Dylan being wrong.
Yeah, no, just join us. Just join me tonight for the prospect chat and join us on Wednesday. Like, there you go. This will be all good. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you all next time.
Hey everyone, before we go, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey, especially our Terror of the Deep patrons.
Thank you so much for making all this possible. We really appreciate your support.